There has been quite a lot of talk from the car manufacturers, and we've seen some slides referring to it, that 2015 seems to be the magical year. And if you count all the manufacturers doing the announcements, and if they're creating sort of production lines of, I've heard of about 10,000 cars each, then you start doing the numbers, and they come to quite a serious sort of amount if you take them all together. What are you seeing from your perspective? I mean, there are about 130,000 petrol stations in Europe alone, and you do need to create some critical mass. How are you seeing kind of that minimum critical mass in terms of hydrogen stations out there, and how much do you think your electrolyzers will how much market share do you think they'll take in those future hydrogen stations?
I don't mind starting if I can turn the microphone on. It's on. Good. Okay. Can you hear me? I think it's clear that the hydrogen vehicles are now arriving, and being part of the UK Hydrogen Mobility Programme, there's a very organic process of trying to work out exactly what the hydrogen infrastructure should be and what it should consist of. I think one thing that we can point to is the conclusions that the German mobility programme reached, which was that 50% of the hydrogen ought to be renewable hydrogen, and that essentially means that it will come via an electrolyser. So I think that's quite an important marker, and I think if you're going to go to all of the effort to develop a car that can operate using a clean fuel and generate no emissions, you kind of shoot yourself in the foot if you use reformed natural gas and that you tanker around the country to refuel with. So I'm pretty optimistic that electrolysis will see a large portion of that market share. In terms of getting a critical mass, our focus for that is the Isle of Wight. It's a nice defined island system, and you can sometimes suffer a little bit of a mosaic approach where there's a lot of different things going on in different areas. And with the Isle of Wight, what we're trying to do is bring a lot of things all together in the same place so that you do create that critical mass. You've got a focal point, you've got you've got the infrastructure that you would need to satisfy that particular island community. I think that's an important thing, to be able to bring everything together in the same place at the same time.
Well, thank you.
7 automotive companies have been spending between 100 million to 400 million a year in this area, and they're still doing it. So that's the first thing not to forget. The second thing, for an automotive company to actually be doing something in 2015, it means they were doing something very serious in an ordinary production 5 years before that, and for an R&D development task 10 years before that. And I can assure you, having seen it with my own eyes, that has all been happening. So the 2015 date is real. In terms of the magnitude, for a single model to be commercially acceptable for a typical automotive maker, about 50,000 vehicles a year is a typical production level. So we're not going to be in 2015 into, for any single maker, a full-on 50,000 unit production, but collectively we are going to pass that level with the various announcements and numbers that have been made known. And I think even in the last 2 days, the announcements from Toyota, which are very explicitly saying, we're not banking on EVs anymore. We're not seeing the volumes on EVs. We're looking at hybrids and fuel cells as the future of transportation. That announcement's to be taken seriously. Toyota does not make announcements carelessly or not carefully. And then the other dynamic that I think that's very interesting here is the dynamic between the Koreans and the Japanese. There's a very, very pitched battle now as to who's going to be first. And in the car industry, that's a very motivating psyche indeed. So this is going to happen. In terms of the fueling infrastructure, very detailed studies have been done in the areas where the infrastructure is going to show up, which is in Korea, Japan, and California, and Germany. The numbers would surprise you. Yes, there's hundreds of thousands of fueling stations throughout Europe on every corner, but to give adequate mobility or very good mobility to the initial owners of these vehicles takes a surprisingly small number of stations. In the state of California, between San Francisco and LA, in the normal driving corridor, the calculation is 68 stations. It's not many. They already have about 30 built, and there are orders coming through in the next number of months for the additional 30 to 40 stations they require.